Well, well, well. Well, well, well. Well, well, well. Well, well, well. Welcome back to my weekly dev stream.
Welcome back to
this week we're going to keep working on the game we've been working on.
This week we're going to keep working on the game we've been working on.
We're working on Elixir Emporium, which is a 3D crafting game that we started a couple months ago.
3D crafting game.
We originally started in a 2D kind of systems demo. Let me, I think, demo, yeah, that'll work in the chat. We originally started with this just to get people playing it. We built it on top of our Chroma Golem API, which does all the AI generation for like image data, or item data, but also images. A lot of the NPC logic, some quest generation stuff, a lot of the logic around what completes quests and what doesn't. There's some AI around the friendship scores and how that plays into your conversations with the NPCs in town. There's a lot going on, a lot more to build. Dimitri's here to help us out today. And we're going to be getting back to UI this week. I've been putting off the codex window for like crafting and browsing the recipes you've created. That's going to be the main one we're going to do, but there's a couple other windows we might get to later. I normally do a ton of stuff off stream, so there's usually like a big dump in the game where we're at between streams, but this week I've been working more on the API stuff, working on some other more backgroundy stuff. So we're kind of picking up where we left off last week, which is kind of cool. Let me bring up my Twitch window, make sure we're all good here. Let's make sure that my sound is coming through. Sorry for the... Okay, we're good. Cool. Let's jump on over to our window. Yeah, so last week we built in image generation. So in this game you can combine any items that you want, and if there's a recipe for that combination, you'll just make it in the game automatically like normal. That's pretty typical for any other game. But if there's not a recipe in the game, we use AI to create a new recipe. We use AI to create the new item, its stats, how it kind of gets allocated around, where you can find it in the world, stuff like that. Here's a great example. We've got images turned off right now. I'll let you know in a second why, but if we were to mix maybe an axe and a scythe to get something kind of cool, there's no recipe for that in the game, so under the hood we're using some AI stuff to basically turn that into a harvester's edge. Excuse me. So that process of combining the scythe and the axe, it took a moment because we were crafting that recipe, but now anytime you combine those two items in the game, it'll always result in this harvester's edge. And similarly, while we're on the topic, we also have this hotbar down here, so you can bring down your tools, and you can use those tools on objects in the world. So everything in the world, minus some of these buildings and stuff in town, but everything out in the world, in this huge world, you can interact with, and you can use any tool you want on any object. And if there's a recipe for that, like using an axe on a tree or a certain kind of tree, you'll get the item for that recipe. So like an axe on an oak tree is going to give you oak logs, etc. But if you were to take an item that doesn't necessarily have a tree, like maybe we use a file on this shade tree, it's going to take a moment, and it's basically generating that recipe under the hood and saying, all right, what what do you get when you use this item on this tree, and it's going to save that recipe as well. I think we actually need to disable image generation on that as well. It's going to time out. I'll disable that first on the stream. I'll just say last week I said that I was using a image of a VM to kind of skip some of the DevOps process of setting up our stable diffusion server, and I linked the image that I was using. I'd like to correct myself this week and say don't use that image. I found out late last night that that image actually comes with a handy dandy little crypto miner in the background. So whenever you're not generating images, it is mining crypto for whoever made the image. So I'm going to go ahead and make us a new server from scratch this week. And I'm not very good at DevOps, so it might take some time, but I was just trying to shave some time off and use a pre-made image from the Azure Marketplace, but turns out you got to be a little bit more cognizant of what's going on there. Yeah, that was fun to find out. I just was getting some weird vibes from some of the output and text and stuff, and noticed, hey, this isn't working the way I expect it to. Can't like ls in certain directories, which is a little weird. So there's some weird stuff going on there. Wouldn't recommend using that image that I linked last week. Excuse me. I hope the mute button on my mic is actually working. Let me... Okay, cool. I got a little bit of a cough still. I was a little bit sick this weekend, so I might be coughing in and out. So nice to know that my mute button does work. Sorry about that. And the other thing that I was going to say was... I don't remember. Oh, right. We also had issues with Git all week. We've just been blowing away, taking a bunch of resources and adding to the game real fast. Basically, trying to move fast and get this game working in just a couple months so we can get our Steam demo up, get people playing this demo versus the old systems demo. But turns out GitHub doesn't want your repo going over 1 gig and strongly recommends your repo doesn't go over 5 gig. I found that out after pushing 25 gig up to GitHub. So since then, all of our pushes and pulls have been rejected. So I spent most of yesterday going through and reorganizing our project directory, project structure basically. And I did a little poll on Twitter. A lot of people are just not using version control apparently, especially for assets like sprites and media and music, textures, models, etc. But the approach that we went with in the end is to pull all of those binary files out. We were using getlfs, but even with that, just wasn't enough. We had 15 gig of files that were over 100 meg, but also 10 gig of files that were under 100 meg. And so even if we checked in everything that was 100 meg or over in LFS, we'd still be double the repo max size. And also the problem with LFS is every time you change a file in LFS, it saves both the old version and the new version. So if you have a ton of files in there, especially files that you're editing every once in a while, it's just going to balloon in size really, really quickly. So, yeah, the approach that we went with was basically to take all of the assets and binary stuff out into a media folder. And I've got this git ignored, so it doesn't check into GitHub. All we check in is really our editor scripts, our scenes, and our systems directory, which is primarily code and prefabs. I'll show that off, but I was trying to take this more systems-based approach for hierarchy management in this demo. So we've got obviously all our AI stuff with Chroma Golem, but we also have like entities in the world that is all of our NPCs and wildlife and interactable objects, all the trees and stuff. Um, Obviously, like all the GUI stuff, our item system, player system, sound effects, blah 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 blah. They're all nice and organized, so instead of having one big like scripts directory, prefabs directory, textures directory, we can kind of put them all in these more consolidated places. So if you go look in the NPCs folder, you've got your typical like prefabs, scripts, databases, but all of that is related specifically to that system. So it's a little cleaner, I think. It kind of threw a wrench in the mix when I had to rip out all the textures and sprites and everything just to move it up into the media folder. So now it's way less organized up here. But at least our systems folder is like still pretty clean. It's just code and prefabs at this point. So that's kind of nice to not have to deal with some of the like asset guts and like models and textures and stuff. We still have a lot of like some sprites I think in here, or maybe it's just scripts now. Yeah, apparently. So that's nice. All our UI stuff, that's probably where we'll be working mostly today. So it's nice to just have a very consolidated section of the repo instead of having to hunt through everywhere. Because once you start expanding some of these, the project gets pretty unwieldy. Let me give a quick scroll through just trying to find anything in this. Especially when a lot of these are folders and folders and folders and folders. But that's what we went with. That's our media folder. We're probably going to set up maybe like a Dropbox for the company or something just to sync it that way instead of having it checked in on Git. We couldn't check this in to get LFS because it's like 20 gig, I think, which is too large. But we could probably do each individual file. But I think that runs into the issues that we talked about before of like once you edit a file, it's going to just keep ballooning the storage space. So I think what we'll do is just either set up like an auto sync with Dropbox or something, or we'll add some like build infrastructure where whenever we build or whenever we push, we could, I guess, do it on a hook in the git push where it'll just zip up this file and send it off to S3 or something. And then we could have another hook on git where whenever you pull, we could pull the latest version from S3 and expand this directory into whatever we pulled. So we are still going to version control all of this, but just not in GitHub, which I was a little surprised the GitHub's repo is so small in what it allows, but I guess that's just the way it is, so we're just finding ways to work around it. But I think what we'll do is maybe we'll just we are already in this game. Let's just run around, maybe craft a few items just to set the tone, and then we'll get on to building our codex menu, which is going to be this menu here. So we've got our inventory menu obviously over here where you can craft stuff just one at a time. If you have multiple of the same item, you can obviously stack stuff in and click it multiple times. After the first craft, it's always a lot faster, so let me grab some items. We don't have an item selected here, so we're just going to be hitting it with our fists. So we'll probably get like bruised fists or something. Oh, right, we still need to disable the image generation on that. Let's go ahead and do that first. But this is the window we'll be working on today. So every time you discover a new recipe when you're crafting stuff, it's going to populate your codex. And your codex is going to have some filtering so you can kind of find items a little faster if you're looking for something specific or just want to browse around. But also it's going to have these be valid item slots. So if this top item were Agrarian's Delight, which is made from, I think it was a fishing rod and let's just say a stick. I don't remember what it was, but we'd have agrarian's delight here, some stats. We'd see the fishing rod and a stick here, and you would see the quantities of how many are in your inventory. So if you wanted this item, you could just scroll through and just take it from this slot, and it would automatically consume these items as if you had dragged them up in here and crafted manually. So it's just a little nicer way to craft items, I think. And I think that this kind of in inventory crafting, it might stick around, but it might also move towards a workbench, just because we're getting to the point where we are generating a ton of stuff every time you create a new item. So previously it was literally just you have this ingredient and this ingredient. What do you get when you mix them together? And that was the only AI prompt. But now we are also generating stats and flavor text and a bunch of stuff about the item itself, but also we are generating an image for that item. We are going to do a little bit of AI stuff on distributing that item throughout the world. So if it's like a new kind of berry or a seed or something that would be in nature, we will make some bushes that are that item bush. And so we will place them throughout the world for you to go find. Basically, every time you craft an item, it's going to not only give you that item, but change the world slightly in a little bit. And there's also a lot of stuff with NPCs that we are working on right now where they are going to have a lot more power to change the world, but we also want to give each one the ability to kind of update their knowledge about the world whenever a new item is crafted. So, for example, right now, if you go talk to Braun the blacksmith, he's got his introduction here, which is all generated every time you play based on his personality. He also has a quest here, so every time he strikes the anvil, his hammer turns into a bouquet of flowers. So that is left as an open-ended quest to the player to go find something that might help, and you can obviously talk to him and write your own message or continue through some of these suggested messages to kind of come up with a solution so you know what to craft. But if, for example, you were to create an item that is a mixture of a hammer and like orichalcum or something, some really strong metal, and then it happens to craft with the flavor text of like, this hammer can't be transformed into anything. If you were to come back to Braun, which you'll see his dialogue actually changes every time you talk to him now. Oh, no, it doesn't. Well, it should. We are going to have to figure out what's up there. But basically, every time you come back to him, he'll say, like, this is the active quest, and he generates new dialogue of, like, hey, have you figured out any solutions for my hammer changing into flowers? But if there's a new item in the world, he might say, like, hey, I heard about this legendary hammer that can't be transformed into stuff. That would be really helpful. Could you go maybe find that? And so, as the player is basically creating new parts of this world, we're also exposing those new parts to each of the NPCs to say, like, hey, would this new bit of knowledge be useful in your quest? Would this new bit of knowledge be useful to you in general? Like, is that something that your next quest might be to go get that or to go get rid of that or whatever? And also it just adds to their general knowledge of the world. So anytime they're talking about something related, they have that as a factoid that they can pull as relevant to what they're talking about. So it keeps more consistency in the world. So he's not going to say like, oh yeah, there's no possible way to have a hammer not transform or something. He's going to say, oh yeah, I heard about this hammer that can't transform, so I wonder what it does. We can maybe do that with my hammer. Something like that. But that's kind of the gist. The the whole pitch of the game is you start out pretty small. Obviously, we have a bunch of items that we're starting with just for debug purposes. These are all of the tools that I have in the game to begin with, but a lot of those you'll be buying from NPCs or trading with NPCs or crafting them yourselves. But you start out pretty small. You can basically just go hit anything in the world with your fists. We are probably going to have some sort of like skill system. So wood cutting is a good example of you're going to need to cut down a lot of these smaller trees before you can interact with like the tree of creation or some of the larger trees or more like magical trees over there. You're basically going to be progressing a set of skills every time you use those skills, and it's going to unlock new objects that you can interact with, which is kind of good for progression, I think, but also it helps a lot with the learning curve at the beginning, where it's a little overwhelming. If you look into this world, you go talk to Braun, and he's like, hey, I have this problem. Please fix it. And you're like, all right, I have an entire world to look at. What am I going to do? There's hundreds of different things to interact with to begin with, but also literally infinite items that I can use to interact with each of those. And each of those items gives different outputs when you use them on each object. So limiting that scope to say like, all right, there's 3 kinds of trees that you can interact with at level 1 woodcutting. And maybe you can find a solution with one of those. Maybe if you think that, I don't know, we've got some like, there's a twisted tree over there. Maybe if you think that is going to really solve this problem, you can say like, oh, I only need level 5 woodcutting to get that. So I'll go talk to somebody else in town, see if he needs something else. And maybe I'll cut down some trees for him in the meantime, train up that woodcutting by getting other items. Basically it gives you kind of a dense web of ways that you can move through this world while making progress on different levels. But with all that said, let's go fix this terrible fence that I just saw sticking out of the ground. Where did you go? Let's fix it by just rotating the fence a little bit. And then let's also disable the image generation on objects, like interacting with objects in the world. And then we'll get into the crafting UI. But I do want to make sure that we can be interacting with stuff just because we're going to be doing that to collect items, to discover recipes, to be testing the UI we're working on. So here's what we did just to short circuit our stable diffusion logic. And I think we called the same thing over here. Yeah. So you can ignore this nice IP that is shut down. The code itself needs cleaned up and combined, but we're just getting stuff working right now. But that should let us very quickly collect items again. So let's just double check that real fast. So if we run over and punch this shade tree, we first look at it because there's no recipe in the game for what you get when you punch a shade tree. But once we get a recipe, things will crash. Right. So here we also had a little bit of, we just double check if the response object is null. This is a base 64 representation of the image. So if we do this check on whether it's null or not, it lets us basically skip over got image for item if there's any errors. And if there aren't errors, we can skip over the image logic and just go on to the rest of the stuff that we need to do. So we actually added that so we could say got image for item here. In the unlikely event that there is actually a API error or something, we can just say this image doesn't have an item. We can queue up a new image generation later or something, but for now it just skips over it instead of erroring, which is nice. Let's test that real fast since we just fixed the problem. Alright, so now when you punch a shade tree, what do we got? We are getting shade leaves. That makes sense. I mean, I guess you can kind of grab them off the tree. But if we were to take an axe to a shade tree, we are coming up with a new plan because we don't have the axe recipe, but now we're getting shade tree logs, which is back to what we would expect. And back to your fist, you just instantly get the shade leaves. Back to the axe, you instantly get the logs, if you can click it, I guess. Lots of polish to be done. We're working on systems still. But it is back to working, and now we've got a bunch of stuff in our inventory, and here is where we will be crafting stuff, unlocking a recipe. We'll probably have a little like floater here of new recipe unlocked for shade cloak, which is kind of cool. Heat resistance. That would be really helpful for pretty much anyone in town who's dealing with like heat problems. So that's a nice recipe to know. We have some storage here, so you can, I wonder if that's hooked up. It is not. We have an extra inventory in this chest that you can drag and drop items into if you find something that you think would be really cool and you couldn't craft again. But obviously you can just craft more if this is all just from shade trees. Yeah, so that's what we're going to be building. Let's do it. So we've got, let's take a look at item combining controller. That's where most of our stuff's going to be happening. After we create an item, this is at the end of that whole flow. We do all the stuff to add it to our slots, but we also add the item to the game itself, to the item database, and we also flag that item as discovered by the player. But these recipes here, now we're creating a recipe for anytime you use shade logs and shade leaves, it creates that shade cloak. That's our new recipe we created. We are saving that recipe to the recipe database, so adding it to the game to be used from then on. And then we're flagging it as discovered from the player. So that's where we're going to go in and we're going to show our little tooltip that says like new recipe unlocked. And we're also going to use our discovered recipe dictionary there to populate our codex window here of all the discovered recipes. So I guess we can just build that. So I built this kind of UI window framework. So let's see if our Codex window manager is hooked up to it. It is. So we've got our callback on window show. That's what we're going to use to populate the list. We'll pull the list from the recipes window. So let's close all but this. Give me one sec. Let me make sure. Is this thing on? Testing. Is this thing on? Okay, cool. Just wanted to make sure. I realized I had both headsets plugged in, or both mics plugged in, so I wanted to make sure they were routing correctly. Cool. So callback on Windows show. So our strategy here, what we're going to do is we are going to pull all the discovered recipes from the recipe database, and then we will probably instantiate a prefab for each one. Let's see if we've already set that up or not. So we've got our, actually not our inventory window, we want our codex window. Let's go look at that. So we've got information, it's down there, content, scroll, content. Okay, we do have a recipe codex, or codex recipe row. Can we jump to that prefab? Oh, okay, we found it. So I think we don't have a script for it yet, so I think that's what we'll add first. I think that's going to be the cleanest thing here. And then we'll give it a load data, or load recipe function to populate all the details. And then we can just, in our code, instantiate a codex recipe row instance for each recipe and load the recipe data into it. Is there anything else that we need to do? We'll need to hook up the filters here. So they're going to be basically filtering all of the recipes to some like item type or something, and then basically doing all this logic. Whenever you click on that, it'll repopulate the list from this subset of items. So I think actually what we'll do is say public void draw recipe list, and we'll have a list of recipes here. And so that is what we'll call from here. So just pop in null so it's not a syntax error for now. And then, yeah, we'll hook up these buttons to basically say pull all the recipes of this type and then call draw recipe list. Let's call it redraw recipe list so it's clear that it's removing the old one. And then looking at the codex, we have some space for some info at the bottom. I'll probably put like the number of recipes you know down there or something. But I think most of the logic for like the quantities in your item, or quantities in your inventory, and also your stash, and also the logic of crafting that item from here. We can put that all in the script in the recipe row controller. So let's call that codex recipe row controller. We can go ahead and open that up. And in our first script, we will just prefab recipe row. So I think there's two ways we could tackle this. One is like top down, and bottom up is the other approach of handling this first. But I think what we'll want to do is, let's go ahead and just get all this done, and then we'll call load recipe and we'll know what needs set up down there as well. So in our codex window, let's get our recipe row prefab set up. Let's pull all of the recipes from the recipe database. So how do we want to do that? We have literally discovered recipes is already in the format we need. It is the data we need. Let's just grab that. It's public, right? Yeah. So list recipe discovered. I guess we can just literally recipe database.instance.discovered recipes. So by default, we will be showing all of the recipes that the player has discovered. So here, the way we show them is we're going to remove all the child objects of this parent container, and then we will loop over each of the recipes, instantiate a new prefab recipe row, load the data that way. So we need a reference to the container, which we will set before we forget. It's this guy. It's this guy. And so clear all ref recipe rows, container children, and that'll be for each in that. Yep. And now we can instantiate a new one. So for each recipe and recipes, we will create it and load the data in. So we want to instantiate it with this as the parent. Then we will grab our recipe row controller and we will call load recipe data, which we haven't built yet, but we'll go build that now. So over here, public void load recipe data. This should all now technically work. What we've built so far, at least. When you open up the codex window, it's going to clear all this out and it's just going to draw these blank rows for each recipe you know. And I don't think the player knows any by default. They might know one. But as you learn more, every time you open the codex, it'll have new recipes. But what this load recipe data function needs to do is set the item name and image here. It needs to set the item name and type here. It needs to set the ingredient name and image over here. And also get the quantities from both the player inventory and the player storage. So you can craft from the storage as well, which is nice, I think. Or maybe we should limit it to being near the storage or something, but doesn't matter right now. We also have these icons here just for later on. I was planning on adding other ways to craft. So obviously by hand right now you just combine two items. But if you were to maybe add a cauldron or something that you can put 3 or more items in, obviously that's going to have its own crafting recipes. And so we'd have a little bit of a different icon here of maybe a cauldron and 3 items that turn into something, or an oven and you get bread and tomatoes and cheese or something, and then you make a pizza. But in here, what we are going to do, we've got this. We need to set up all these references so we can set the data properly. So we have, let's look at all the objects we have. Output item slot is that guy. Item name. Probably want to add the image in here as well, but with our Stable Diffusion server being down, I might not add it immediately just because we don't have any images to test with. So I might add that in later. But we've got, I guess we can make these a little nicer. Then I'll have to all be game objects. Let's just go down each one. So our background, we could change this based on like item rarity or some other property on the image or on the item. I don't think we will right now, but that's a nice thing to keep in mind if we wanted like to highlight something. That'd be a good way to do it. Similarly, the border would also be good for like rarity, showing different rarities, I guess. But again, we're not going to do anything with that. In our output item slot, I think we do need to make this a inventory slot manager, because I think that's going to be what allows us to take items out. But I want to think through how we want to do this. But for now, let's actually go into prefab mode so the changes we make will stick. And let's make sure we haven't made any other changes in the meantime. No prefab changes to make. All right. So here, if we make this a item slot or inventory slot manager, yeah. So we technically need to link it to an inventory. So we can make a codex inventory that has infinite slots, and each one obviously can map to one of these. It'll get a little funky with the different like refiltering. So maybe we'll do some sort of like temporary inventory or something. But we could load data into this slot for the item to be crafted, and then have can retrieve item turned off, and then we could toggle that on. I think actually what we want to do is maybe do a codex slot manager, which is probably similar, maybe a child method, but we'll handle an on click that will check to see if you have these ingredients and then craft it and do basically what we're doing in the item slot manager. Inventory slot manager. So on pointer down. That's not used at all. Wonder why that's still in there. But drag and drop on begin drag. This is kind of the logic that we'll pull over, but I think we do want to move it to on pointer down. Because we'll want to, basically, when you click, it's going to consume those items that you have in your inventory. We don't want you to be able to put it back in the slot and get those items back. It's going to basically change your cursor to a permanent drag for you to put that item in your inventory. I mean, I guess we could just put it in your inventory for you. Is that nicer, or it might be less obvious? It would be cleaner code for sure if you were to just click this and the item goes to your inventory instantly, instead of you having to click it and it creates this temporary dragged item for you to put in your inventory. So maybe we just, it's kind of nicer for the player as long as they know that it's going to their inventory. If they click on this and it goes instantly to their inventory, I think that's nicer than having to click and drag, click and drag, click and drag. That lets them like click 5 times if they want to craft 5 of them. I think that's a lot nicer. So what we'll do, let's go ahead and create a codex slot or a crafting slot manager, because then we can kind of reuse it. Let's do a crafting slot manager, I think. And what we'll do is we'll have a list of ingredients, and on click, it'll try and consume all of those ingredients. If it can, it'll add the set item to your inventory, and if it can't, it'll display a message or something. So we'll remove this, but I just want to keep it around for reference right now. Let's also move this kind of like that. So here, let's set up kind of the structure of our crafting slot manager. We want a public item to be crafted, and so yeah, I guess we probably do want amount to craft, but I was also thinking for the ingredients, we could have a list of items, and that would allow us to set up duplicates. I'm dancing around the point here. I want to make this generic enough to, obviously it works if you have 2 items here, and you craft one of this and one of this makes this. But if we want to have recipes where 1 of this and 5 of this makes this, we want to kind of tupleize the quantity of each ingredient with the actual ingredient itself. So one way to do that is to have a small structure of like a tuple of item and quantity in each of the ingredient slot things that we're going to add. Or we could have a list of ingredients. You could have like stick, diamond, 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 if you want 5 diamonds and a stick. It'd be a little janky to kind of collapse those into these quantities here. But we could do that. I think the cleaner approach is to have some sort of public class crafting ingredient and quantity. Something like that, where we have a public item ingredient and a public int quantity. So now we can say public crafting ingredient and quantity item to be crafted, which replaces our item to be crafted and amount to craft, because we can set that to be a pickaxe and quantity of 1 or quantity of 2 or whatever. We can also have a public list of crafting ingredient and quantity of ingredients. We also need to make this system.serializable just so we can edit it in the editor. I want to make sure that that works, because if that doesn't work, we are going to need a different approach. Okay, yeah, this works. So did I not capitalize this B? I did not. Item tobe crafted. So now what we can do is we can, for example, say diamond pickaxe or whatever. We're actually serializing this item here, which will be a little bit changed. One thing we still need to do is we have our global starting data, which defines a ton of items to start the game with, and also a ton of recipes. But these items we actually need to change into scriptable objects, so we can edit them and set them up in the editor instead of in code, because we're gonna start adding like images and 3D models and stuff to them here for each item, and we don't want to have to set up like, oh, here's our directory of sprites, go read from that directory, go find the one that matches the item name and all that jazz. We just want to set it up in the editor to be nice and clean. So all of these will get turned into scriptable objects, which means this slot here will be drag and drop an item in instead of setting all these properties manually. But really no change in logic, just fun to point out. Let's see here. So in our crafting slot manager, we have our items to be crafted. Let's actually set our quantity to default to 1. I think that's going to be more reasonable in all cases. And we can also now add ingredients that come with quantities. So we can have 2 ingredients, 1 of each, and this ingredient is this ingredient is that, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just gonna take it slow, I think, on this, because I want to make sure that we are setting the item data properly in this, instead of like shallow references that are gonna mess stuff up. But if we were to do an I pointer down, and then just throw in for now, trying to craft item to be crafted dot, oh right, it is ingredient, isn't it? Let's rename this to item. And then maybe we just throw in a little bit of something like that, and then yeah, we can debug out the ingredients as well. So that'll be it for now. We're just going to have this placeholder to make sure that we can click on the slot and it knows what ingredients we will be consuming, what item it will craft. We're going to get the rest of the window set up first. So we can get rid of our inventory slot manager now. And now in our codex row controller, what we want is a public crafting slot manager. So that'll be our reference to the output item. So that means that this guy needs a public void load recipe function that we will go ahead and call here. So crafting slot manager.load recipe. We pass that through, and so that'll hook up what we will use in our on pointer down to say item to be crafted is equal to recipe dot resulting item name. We actually want item database dot find item by the name. We store the names just because it's a little easier to pass the data around. Right. I always forget the syntax on this shorthand, but I think that's it. Yeah. And then we'll do quantity equals 1. So that'll set up our output item. And we will also set the ingredients the same way. So then when you're clicking on this, it'll know what ingredients are being used in the recipe. That's probably right. Let's double check this. In recipe.ingredients, is this private? Let's go look at our recipe. Oh, we've got ingredient names. Right. So we actually want string ingredient name. So we will just get the ingredient name here. And since everything is one quantity to begin with, we're just setting that manually, but we'll pull it in later. So that should be all set up to load in that recipe. So if we go back to our higher level recipe row controller that we're setting up, so it's now going to populate this script correctly. We can get rid of our inventory slot manager that was placeholder. We do want to, let's go ahead and set that name. Since images are turned off right now, we'll just use the name placeholder. And that'll be, we've got a public text mesh pro UGI item name text. So we'll set that here as well. Cool, that'll work. We gotta set that reference. That'll be here. We set that here. And then the rest of the row data we will go ahead and set from the row controller rather than the slot manager. Slot manager is just for this slot here. So we'll quickly do that just so we can get in and test this out and make sure it's all working, and then we'll get back in and set up the actual crafting of the items. So set up the name and the type, which are here and here. We can go ahead and say resulting item name, and type that is not correct. It is item database instance find item by recipe resulting item name item type. Cool, so that should set up both of them. We don't need to do anything with the icon for now. We just need to set the ingredient names real fast, but let's set these references before I forget. That guy, that guy, that guy. So here we'll have, here's item name. Cool. What we'll probably end up doing is turning these slots into a prefab as well, just so we can instantiate a dynamic amount of them. So for recipes that have more than 2 items that we'll add later. But for now, since all the recipes are 2 items, we'll just hard code in ingredient 1 and ingredient 2. So let's just say, like TestMesh Pro, ingredient 1 name and ingredient 2 name. So here we can pull in our list and do that. Again, this will only work for recipes that have 2 ingredients right now, but that's all the recipes in the game, so it's all good. So that should handle that, this, and this. The only thing left is these quantity counts. So what we will do there, we've got amount on hand. It's handled in both. So now we'll do our quantity counts. So that's going to be the first number is the amount that you have in your inventory plus the amount you have in your player storage, and the second number is always 1 for now because all recipes only take 1 item for now, but later on if you make like a bucket of berries or something, it might require 1 bucket and 5 berries, something like that. So what we'll do is say int amount in inventory. This is actually player database dot instance dot player inventory, I think. Let's go look. Just inventory. And in our inventory, do we have a method that counts the number of items we have? We do not, so let's add it. Public int count item in inventory. So this will look through each of the slots, check to see if the slot's item is equal to our item that we're searching for, and it'll, do we need link? Using link. And it'll sum up the stack size in each of those slots that match. So that looks correct. Cool, so now we can go over and, where were we? Here, we call get count, what did we even call it? Count item in inventory. And this, yes. We have the ingredient name here. Do we want to take a string here? Let's just do both. Public int count item in inventory string item name, and that'll just compare to item name instead. Does the exact same logic. That also looks correct. So now we can row controller amount in inventory here. We need amount in storage as well. Cool. So that gets our 2 quantities that we sum up as int amount on hand, so amount in inventory plus amount in storage, and then our string is just amount on hand over, it's always 1, but we'll compute that later. the amount that you need to craft. So we'll put a placeholder in here. Cool. So that's not quite correct. We actually need to do that for each ingredient. So public text mesh pro UGI ingredient 1 quantities and ingredient 2 quantities. So this is actually going to be ingredient 1 quantities. So we actually want ingredient names. The first ingredient here and then we'll do the exact same thing for the second ingredient. That's pretty messy code, but we are moving fast today. We want to get it working. Let's just, yeah, we can just reuse these. We'll clean it up later. And ingredient 2 quantities get set, amount needed for recipe. This should be fine. Let's go see if it works, I think. We do need to set these references real fast back in the inspector. So ingredient 1 name is that amount on hand for ingredient 1. Ingredient 2 name and amount on hand. So I think this, I mean, obviously I don't write bugs, so should be perfect. Let's disable our codex window so it all initializes correctly and see if it works. So if we open it right now, we have no discovered recipes, so it is blank. That is correct. If we then, let's move this guy around. If we were to craft an axe and a scythe together, see what we get. We get a harvester's blade. Cool. So that should now unlock that recipe. We get a little debug down here, number of discovered recipes 1. So if we open the recipe codex, we broke it. Let's see. Object reference not set to an instance. I think item in the slot is null for all of these. So we actually want that, which is the silliest fix ever. But in the case that an inventory slot is null, obviously without that, if you call null.item name, it's going to throw an error, the error that we got. But the question mark dot short circuits that. So if this is null, it just returns null. If it's not null, then it calls .item name. So let's try that once more with that fix in place. And I'll craft the exact same 2 items as ingredients. We'll see what we get now, because it's fun that every time you play you get different items, since that's kind of the whole point of the game. So if we mix an axe and a scythe now, what do we get? We get a harvester's edge, which actually sounds very similar to what we got before. I can't remember exactly what it was, but cool. So we have number of discovered recipes 1. If we open this up, we now have harvester's edge here. It takes an axe and a scythe. We will need to update this if it's already open. So for example here, if we mix shears in a bucket, it's not going to update this window until we close it and reopen it. But it does seem to be working. We still need to set up crafting, so when you click on this, it'll consume these items in your inventory. I want to get the quantities tested as well, so let's go over and see what we can do. Let's punch an oak tree, I guess. Classic. Or is this tree broken? That tree might be broken. Let's gather from a bush. So let's just get a bunch of stuff in our inventory. So we're getting handfuls of berries here. If we were to also maybe take a harvester's edge, use that on the bush. We are also going to get mystical berries. All right. So I also am curious what we get if we were to use a watering can on a bush. So let's see what we get there. A flourishing bush. Okay. As a side note, one thing that we are going to implement that we haven't quite yet is every time you interact with an object in the world, right now it just gives you an item, and that's cool. But we are also going to add in a kind of parallel system to ask the AI under the hood, like, what effects you should also have on the object you're interacting with. So this is a great example of maybe you might not get an item back if you use a watering can on a bush, but it might change the bush itself, like make it larger, change the name of it or the items that it gives you back. The converse is like if you're harvesting from a bush enough, the bush will eventually go away, or if you cut down a tree enough, the tree eventually goes away. We're kind of looking at it from both ends of the spectrum. If you're also using objects on it that might help it, you want to like beef it up or change it in some way. So that'll be kind of cool to be able to change the world in that way, I would say. But now we have a ton of items. Let's see what we get if we take a mortar and pestle and our mystical berries. We should get a new recipe over here after I close and reopen this window. A potion of mystical insight, which gives us some insight stat, which does nothing, but might be helpful to one of the NPCs in town who their quests look at the attributes. But, oh, that's awful. I can't read that. But I'm pretty sure that says 0 out of 1. Let's try this again. Maybe handful of berries. Yeah, surely that says 0 out of 1. Elixir of profound clarity. Well, that's even more insight. Wow. So yeah, I guess wait, that does say 7 out of 1. Okay, so I guess the quantities are working. And I wonder if we have handful of berries. Oh. So it's saying 0 out of 1 here for the handful of berries because it's technically not in our inventory. It's in this other slot here. So we probably need to sum those in as well. So now we have, that's such terrible text. I'm so sorry. Yeah. So this says 8 out of 1. Let me just craft one so it becomes 7 and it becomes a little more obvious with the bright green on text. We got a berry pouch, so we move that back to our inventory. We're closing and reopening this because code. So now it is 7 out of 1. So the quantities are working. Dear God, this text is awful, but we need to rebuild our Stable Diffusion server for the images. So I think what I'll do for now is just turn on auto sizing for the text and then squeeze it in so it doesn't overlap as much. But this is working. Next up, we're just going to set up clicking on these items to craft them and add them to your inventory. So that'll be a lot nicer way to craft, I think. Once you have all these recipes, you'll be able to go to an NPC, talk to him, get a sense for the kind of item that he needs for his quest. And so this guy's swords are too soft. Oh, because all of his metal that he touches turns to pure gold. So you could talk to him a bit, be like, hey, would gloves help? Do you want a different kind of metal? Blah, blah, blah. Would X, Y, and Z help? And then you can go through your codex and be like, you know what? I think I'll make him a watering can. You just click that, adds it to your inventory. You go talk to him again, and then you'll be able to drag over the watering can you want to give him. And we just gave him a stack of 7 berries. It did not help. All right, so let's fix up the text a little bit. This is absolutely awful. Let's see, item name, we want auto size here, and we want to pull it in. We don't actually want to be doing that. In this view, we want to go over here. So here, I mean, the auto size on the name isn't actually terrible here, except for when it gets long names. So let's just do that a little bit. We'll pull it in a little bit more on the ingredients because it has the quantities. But let's at least not get it overlapping with the frame. I forgot to check if these were set. I think they were. But over here, importantly, what we could do is move this more like that. So we know that it's not going to overlap. And let's see, that's 12, and let's just make sure these are aligned. So item name here. Let's turn auto size on that as well. And then we'll bring these guys in so they don't overlap with the border either. All right, so that should be a lot nicer, I think. Cool. I think what we can do next is let's go in, let's double check that that all looks good, and then let's click on one of these slots to make sure our on pointer click event is triggering correctly. And then we'll set up our crafting. So let's see what we get with a hammer and a scythe. Harvest hammer, that's pretty cool. And yeah, that looks so much nicer. It would be nice if these were consistent text sizes, but we're going to replace all these with the images anyway, so that's really just a quick fix to get it looking good and actually readable until we get those images back in. And then, so here, if we click on that, trying to craft harvest hammer, ingredient scythe, ingredient hammer. Cool, that looks like it's all ready to set up. The things that we have left to do in this window are this crafting on click. We want to change this text to red if it if you don't have enough of the quantity, green if you do. We also want to set up these filters. We don't quite know what we're going to be filtering by yet. It'll probably be tools, materials, consumables, etc. So we'll probably hold off on these a little bit just until we have more of a sense of all the items you're going to be getting. But we can at least set up the crafting now, which will be really nice. So let's do that. Or I guess while we're here, we can just really quickly say if amount on hand is greater than or equal to amount needed for recipe, then let's see, red, green, blue, that's correct. Good enough. We'll do the same here. It's not the brightest red or the brightest green, but that's probably for the best. But that should handle those texts. So let's get crafting working. So let's say, I also realized we probably want to fix, sorry to jump around a little bit, but in our inventory window, we have the crafting area. These are their own inventory slots. So I want to see if we have an easy reference to those inventory slots. We don't really. I also wanted to include them in the sum of crafting, but I can't remember exactly how we set those up, so you might want to come back to those. This will probably all go away anyway, so it's kind of a silly thing to fix right now if we move this out and just have it be a regular inventory again, but just wanted to see if it would be an easy fix. Cool. So over yonder, let's have a public bool. Has ingredients, sure. We also want to, we're counting the count item in inventory. Oh, that is what we added. We are counting it in the inventory right now, but we also want to count the stash. So let's say, it'll be a little silly to try and consume from both, actually. But I guess we can do it. I think it's nice if you can craft stuff from like your stash instead of having to pull items out. I think in games like Terraria, they get a little bit closer where if you have your stash open, it counts in your inventory for crafting, but you very quickly end up with a situation where you need multiple stashes open because chests are so small. The inventory management, I'd say, is a neat trick to get players to come up with solutions to their own problems, but it's one of those things where there's no good solution. So yeah, it does increase like playtime and getting players to try new things and try a different thing each time they play, but none of those approaches are typically very fun. So I think it'd be nicer if you could just scrap all that and let players focus more on the fun stuff instead of managing their inventories and managing their stashes. So we're gonna let players craft from both their inventory and their infinite stash. So we'll say int amount in inventory, amount in stash. So here we can say if that. So for each ingredient, we see if the amount in your inventory plus the amount in your stash is less than the amount needed for this ingredient in this recipe. If that is true, you don't have enough of that ingredient, so we return false. If none of those return false, you return true. So that means you have the ingredients to craft it, and you say if has ingredients log has the ingredients. Cool. It'll be a little bit finicky because we're gonna need to remove the item from both the inventory and the stash, and it'll be not very clear which one it's coming from, but I think that'll be fine. Let's take this as a base. Let's see what we're doing here. So for each ingredient, we're grabbing the amount in the inventory and amount in the storage and the amount needed. So if the amount in the inventory is greater than or equal to the amount needed, then yes, we just remove from the inventory. Let's go ahead and make sure we have a remove item, which we don't. So we want to pass the item and the amount to remove. So let's say remove item and the amount to remove. So there we'll probably go through all the slots, find a slot that matches. It's a little bit finicky too, because you could have like multiple stacks of the same item. So you don't necessarily just want to stop at the same stack. So we'll say for each inventory slot in the slots. So we go through all the slots. If that slot matches the item we're looking for, then we want to check to see if the stack size is greater than or equal to the amount we are reducing. And if it is, then we can, that means we can just do slot.adjust stack size for amount. If it is not, that means we want to remove that whole slot and also continue on looking at other slots. So we want to say int items removed. It's there. We'll probably return the number of items removed. So here we can just say return amount because we have consumed enough from that stack. But here there's a little bit in that stack, but it doesn't cover the full amount. So we will say slot.adjust stack size, slot.stack size. And I'm realizing that these are supposed to be negative because we are adjusting it to be negative, not adding more. So here we will go ahead and say items removed is that much. So there's still more quantity to remove. So we're going to continue on looking at other slots. And so if we make it through all of the slots and we haven't returned early, then we want to just return the items that we've removed. So this is almost correct, but I think here, instead of checking to see if the stack size is amount, we need to check to see if the stack size is greater than or equal to the number of items left that we need to remove. So we want, let's rename this to amount to remove. And we can say amount to remove minus items removed, or amount removed. So that way, starts out at 0. We're checking the first slot that matches. We get amount to remove minus 0, which is just amount to remove. But if we remove like 2 or 3 from that stack and we still have more to remove, and we go on and find another stack somewhere else, it's going to say, it's going to check if that slot's stack size is greater than or equal to the original amount to remove minus what we've already removed, which I think is correct. So that'll be good. And then finally, we will return the total amount removed. So here we can say, well, it doesn't really matter here. But it'll matter in this else case where we don't have enough in the inventory, but since we do have the ingredients, we know that we have enough in the inventory plus the stash. So I see that it already kind of did this because we have an amount in inventory. We didn't really need to compute that. But yeah, maybe we'll just keep that. But what we would have done is int amount removed is equal to that, and then we would do amount needed minus amount removed. Something like that. So, I mean, maybe we'll keep that because it's a little clearer. I think it is. We don't really need this. And I think that'll also be a little better if we were to have multiple ingredients that are the same item. Maybe it wouldn't matter. But this is going to consume all the ingredients. And we should be able to assume that all the ingredients will be consumable. And then we will add that crafted item to the inventory. All right, so that should work. We need to update the quantities, though. These guys, obviously when you craft this, it's going to reduce these quantities by 1. But we also know that we need to be updating these whenever your inventory changes anyway. So I'm wondering if we want to have some sort of public function that is like redraw the codex window if it's open, and then we call that whenever the inventory's items change. I don't think we do, actually, because I think that's a little too much overhead. What we can do is just so this is the crafting slot manager. We want to redraw the codex window. And I think what maybe we'll do is in the codex window manager, we can store like list recipe shown recipes, or let's call it last shown recipes. So here, let's go ahead and say last shown recipes is equal to recipes. And so this will also be nicer for if the player closes the codex window and reopens it. I guess we could reopen it to what they had shown. I don't think we want to do that quite yet, but it will let us redraw recipe list with just whatever it already is. So we can say in this guy, basically what we'll be doing is codex window.redraw. I know I don't have the variable yet, but redraw recipe list with codex window dot last shown recipes. So that'll redraw it with whatever recipes we're already showing, which handles filtering and stuff like that. But the question is, how do we want to get this reference here? Because these crafting slot managers are instantiated, I guess we could do it like we could pass it down in our load recipe data, which instantiates the does it create the crafting slot manager? It does. It instantiates that, so we could pass that on down too. I don't think we want to do that. I think maybe what we'll do is just add it to our UI references, because we have all these other window references. Makes sense to have the codex one. So let's say UI references, let's add a public codex window manager. And then here we can just say UI references dot codex window codex window, whatever we named it. Oh, it's dot instance, right. And then same thing over here. So that'll redraw it with our quantities updated. Similarly, we could call this every time our inventory updates. But unless we have some sort of like if is window, whatever we called it in UI window is open. We could do something like this, which lets us basically liberally call redraw whenever we want. So we'd be able to call it on inventory changes and stuff. But I feel like this is just asking for problems down the road. If we like try and populate this window and then show it or something, like even in the same frame, like if we call redraw recipe list and then also call dot show, we need to make sure that show happens first, which is pretty weird. But maybe we can get around that by having a log error or log warning maybe. Tried to redraw the recipe list while the codex window was closed. Yeah, so I mean, it's not necessarily like a problem if this happens, but I feel like this is a case where it's very likely that if this were to trigger, we wouldn't expect it to trigger. And that's where the bug comes in. So I think the warning will help here. But that also lets us say add item, remove item, clear slot data, all these manipulations. We could add some sort of like event queue of all the stuff that happens whenever your inventory changes. I think that makes sense to live on the inventory instead of like when you manipulate an object in the world and it gives you an item. We wouldn't want that to also try and redraw your codex. Like the responsibility is not there, but your inventory, maybe it is. I really just want to avoid like having callbacks everywhere and it becomes impossible to trace down what's happening and what's not. So I think for the time being, we'll keep this in because it's a nice little check. But I think we'll want to let's just close and reopen the codex to refresh it when we're getting new items. That's something we'll need to fix because obviously players are gonna want to leave their codex open. But I mean, hard question. Because also we don't really want to tie it to this inventory here because I mean, this is just the generic inventory method. So the player has their inventory, has their storage inventory, but also like chests have inventories, NPCs have inventories. You don't want to call redraw codex window whenever you add item on an NPC's inventory because it won't do anything, but I guess that's when you would want to bring stuff up to like the player database and have a add item, remove item up here, but it's whatever. I think this is fine. I think I mean, it's very early for the game. We don't need to figure this out quite yet. You can just close the codex and reopen it for updated quantities. But at least when you're interacting with the codex, we need to fix that oak tree. When you're interacting with the codex, you'll be able to see those quantities update. So let's gather some items real fast. We got a bunch of assorted berries. Let's use some scissors on this bush as well. Like, it's nice to leave this window open and see these quantities change, obviously. Let's also use the shears. So it would also be nice to have a similar thing over here. So if you were to craft branches and bush trimmings, see what you get. Bundle of kindling. Like, it should show up over there. It's not a big deal that it doesn't yet, but it definitely needs to. Um, but if you were close this and reopen it, now you can see, and it's still a little janky because we're not including these. Excuse me. But if we move these over back to our inventory, close and reopen this, it's now 7 out of 1, 3 out of 1. If we click this, it should add, well, I think we forgot to set our UI references method. Yeah. We'll do that real fast. But it should, when you craft this, it should update these, is all. Let's set that, let's test it, and then let's maybe polish stuff up a little bit. So we'll go grab some new items again. I guess we can just start adding more items to our inventory too at the start. Let's do a file and a scythe maybe. Rough sticks. I've also got some helmets of superiority, which is interesting because one, they're not actually added to our inventory, and two, it's always helmets of superiority when you're harvesting from something and you change to something that doesn't have a recipe. So if I bring the hoe over here and I switch to a hoe while harvesting, it always gives a helmet of superiority for some reason, which is a little strange. But that'll be a fun bug to trace down. But we've got some items now. Let's do trimmed bush, leaves, and rough sticks. Let's see what we get with that. We get a natural broom, which, okay, that kind of is fun. So if we take that, move these guys back to our inventory, close the codex, reopen it. Now it should consume these to make more of these when we click this. It does not. Or is it? If we close this, reopen it, it is, but we're not redrawing the inventory window. All right, so we need to do that as well, but I clicked it 4 times. We should have 3 sticks left. Or maybe I clicked it 3 times. I'm going to click it 4 times here. 1, 2, 3, 4. We have has the ingredients to craft. I'm going to click it a 5th time. And I think that means we don't have the ingredients to craft. But maybe we should have a little debugging there. Because if I keep clicking it, I clicked it a bunch. We have 6 plus the 4 that I crafted. So we should have 10 of these and not more. But I'm going to keep clicking this a little bit more. This should be down to 8. Let's double check. So, or maybe it was 10. But we do have the 10. We consumed them all. We just need to redraw our inventory. That's fine though. I didn't even test that this was updating the quantities while we were crafting. So let's grab some more of those. Rough sticks is what we need. I don't remember how to get those. Trimmed branches, maybe a file. Rough sticks, that's what we need. So here, let's grab a few. Cool, we'll reopen the codex window. So now these quantities should update. They do. Okay, cool. So that's nice, and it turns red. I'm going to make those colors a little brighter though. But let's redraw the inventory window, and that should be good for crafting that way. Redraw the inventory window. redraw inventory. And that takes an inventory, so we want to pass in player database.instance.inventory. Okay. Down yonder in row controller. Yeah, let's change these to the full 1 instead of half values on the red and green colors. Same with here. Cool. And I think we are going to leave adding stuff to your inventory, updating the codex window for another day, because I want to mature these systems a little bit more instead of just putting callbacks everywhere. But let's do one last thing. Let's just test it, make sure that when we craft an item, it adds it to your inventory and just works as it should. So let's get some items real fast. Let's use an acorn on the bush, see what we get. Mystery berries this time. So now an acorn on the bush, what do we get? Disappointed squirrel food. Nice. A tragically misplaced hope, not quite the hiding spot a squirrel aimed for. Alright, alright. So now, if we combine those, yeah, I guess maybe we should next also grab these inventory slots. Squirrel's Blessing increases luck for a short duration. Alright. So that's what we're crafting. These are our ingredients. Let's reopen this. So we should see these update in real time now. Okay, they do. Cool. Cool, so crafting from the codex now works. We now get new recipes when we craft them. Maybe on combination, that's where we'll update the codex. We'll redraw it. So let's do that real fast. So combining items controller at the very end. Generate items 4, blah, blah, blah. Recipe database, discover recipe. Ooh, that's actually a great place for redraw the codex window if it's open. We want UI references dot UI references dot instance dot codex window dot last shown recipes. That'll work. So now when we craft recipes, it'll automatically add them to the window. That's a good spot for them. And we're using last shown recipes so we don't, for example, like filter down to just tools and then combine something over here that would redraw this to all items. So we're just going to make a couple. These are looking good. I feel like it would be nice if you maybe clicked on mystery berries or disappointed squirrel food or something and it showed you how to get that item. So either through crafting or using an item on a bush, something like that. I think at the very least, all these items need tooltips, kind of like these, obviously. So maybe we could also add the ability to like hold control on a cool tooltip to show like either crafting recipes or the foraging recipes to get that item. Maybe we'll hold off on that until I decide which way we want to go. But these are looking good. I think the biggest thing is we want to include these two inventory slots in the calculations for whether you have that item or not. So let's figure out how we want to do that. So when we set up our player database inventory, we set up inventory slots here. Does this set up our crafting slots as well? does not. All right, we need to hunt for where the crafting slots are set up. Redraw inventory. Okay. Let's take a look at crafting area. Combining two items. These guys have an inventory slot manager, so they need to be initialized somewhere because they're not going to work with the empty inventory. So where? So if we look at our load data function in here, we have 11 references. Anvil window man. Oh, I bet it's in the wait, that's where we were just looking, right? Inventory window manager. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, not there. So set item data. I mean, maybe we aren't setting item data there. We're just gonna go hunting now. Can't remember where I set all this up. This is on inventory slot manager, which I don't think is the right place. We need something higher level. Let's go up to our player database. I think that's the natural place to look to start. Initialize default slots might have it. No? Right, that's on the inventory. I mean, I guess we can search for inventory.create. Tool belt size, NPC has a gift processing inventory. Anvil has an inventory. Alchemy inventory. It's in the item combining controller. Okay. So that is fine. We can treat this as a third inventory for the player. Creates on start, that's fine. We can just set it in the player database as a third inventory for public inventory, alchemy slots, and we can just set it here. Let's say player database dot instance dot alchemy slots. Or we'll rename it to alchemy inventory. But let's get these references in. Oh, right. We actually want this. So we're linking all three of those slots to the alchemy slots inventory. Let's rename that to alchemy inventory. And that's still kind of a placeholder, like we might keep it, might not, I don't know yet. But that means we now have a reference to that alchemy inventory that in our codex window manager, or our crafting slot manager, I guess. We now have a third inventory we can look at, so I'm wondering if we should actually just rewrite this instead of hard coding in two inventories to have like a list of source inventories. Which I think we will do, because I mean, in a game about crafting and item management and stuff, it might make sense that we're going to have lots and lots of different inventories later. So what we should do, let's set up craft display and crafting from codex window. Cool, we can just commit everything that we have that works, and then we can on the player database, I think what we'll do is set up a public list inventory crafting source inventories. And then I also want to, while we're here, let's check out, I think this is fine for initializing that inventory. We do some initializing here just to set up all the slots to be empty. But I don't think we need it on our alchemy inventory because we're setting it up elsewhere. There might be a race condition there, but I think it's going to be fine. But it also might make sense to move here just for code logic-ness. Let's move this, just that, over here. So in our awake function, we're creating our default inventory of size 3. These guys are prefabs, I believe. Yeah, so they're going to be already initialized. That's why we're needing to set them up, because they just have a num slots. But we're creating our slots manually here. And we can keep doing that in our item combining controller. We're basically just mapping these slots into the player database alchemy inventory slots. I'm going to stop saying slots now. Cool, so I've completely forgot what I was doing. Right, we were setting up source inventories for our crafting slots. So we have now, close all this, we've got our player database which has crafting source inventories. Let's, I think, let's do that in code here. Let's say track all our inventories that can be used as crafting sources. So we'll add our inventory, our storage, and our alchemy inventory. So all those are ready to be referenced in our crafting slot manager. We will start over at has ingredients. So we will say int amount in crafting source inventories is equal to 0. So now we can loop over our crafting source inventories, check to or grab the count of that item in that inventory, and then if the amount across all of the inventories is less than the quantity that we need, then we return false. So this basically just replaces our 2 hard-coded inventories we were using earlier. And so here, we're going to do something similar, but now we need to loop through each inventory and consume as we go. So we'll say int amount consumed from crafting source inventories. And then let's take a look at this. For each inventory in our inventories, so the order is going to matter a little bit. We can reorder them later because they are set here, obviously in a specific order. I'm going to put the alchemy inventory first because I think it makes sense to consume from first, but then inventory, then storage makes sense. Might be able to swap these two. So we'll get our amount in the inventory if the amount in our current inventory is greater than or equal to the quantity that we need minus the amount we've consumed so far. Then we can remove that amount from that inventory and break out of this loop, so we stop consuming from inventories. So that is correct. Otherwise, we will consume the amount in the inventory for that item in this inventory. We add it to the amount consumed we have so far, and then we continue on to the next inventory. So why is this mad? Right. So we're going to delete this because it basically does the same thing. So now we've consumed everything. We know that we have the ingredients already, so we don't need to track like whether the consumed amount is greater than or equal to the amount we need. We are just going to go ahead and assume that for each ingredient we consume enough out of these inventories for it to craft. So that should work. The one piece that we are missing is in our codex row controller. We need to sum up from all the inventories here instead of manually doing it the way we were. So let's say int amount in crafting source inventories is equal to 0, and then we can just sum up this way. Cool. That gets our amount on hand, and we will just swap amount on hand for this bad boy. And that'll work for ingredient 1 and ingredient 2. And that can also be a loop, especially if we add multi-ingredient things later, 3 or more. But it was pretty easy to come back and turn this into a loop, so we can do that later too. Amount in crafting source inventories is 0. Do the same thing. This guy. Amount needed for recipe, we leave the placeholder in. Uses the new ingredient name. Cool. So this should work. And let's look at the Codex window manager. And I keep going back and forth on whether we should call this on updating the inventory. I think we're going to do it just to make it nice for now. So we will have inventory window manager whenever we add an item. Oh, right. We can't really do it because all our add and remove logic is directly on the inventory, which we don't know if it's happening to the player or other NPCs and stuff. So the solution is basically to, on the inventory object itself, we want to expose some sort of like list of events that trigger when the inventory changes, so adding items, removing items, adjusting the stack sizes, etc. And then when we set up the player inventory here, we can add events to that. And when we're setting up like NPC inventories and other stuff, they just have no events. But that'll let us say at the end of add item or something, we can say for all the events, trigger them. But we're going to hold off on that because we don't really know the signature of the type of events we want. It might be like very generic of just redraw the codex window, but it might also be like more specific with parameters of like go call this function with the actual item that changed or something like that. So this is the good way to do it that we will do, but for now we're just going to assume all inventory changes are those on the player inventory. And we will say UI references dot instance dot codex window dot redraw recipe list. Let's say switch to events later. And we'll do the same on remove item. We will do the same on clear slot data. And I think that'll be fine. It'll work for what we need right now. And it'll look nicer for the window. So let's just go test all that. Let's make sure it's all smooth, doesn't error. I'm sure I forgot to set something somewhere. So now, empty codex. If we were to go first, we will collect something from a birch tree, which doesn't add any recipes, so there's no errors there. Let's go ahead and use an axe. Well, that'll probably give us birch logs as well. Let's use a scythe on the birch tree, just to get a little bit more of the same item. Still getting birch logs. Alright, let's use a pickaxe, I guess. Birch wood chips. Alright. We'll get a few of those. So now, if we combine these two, it should show the recipe immediately, and it should also show the correct quantities, which it does. Birch wood plank. If we craft one of these, it should add it to the inventory, not this slot. It does. Let's craft another one. It should also be consuming from here, which I think it is, but it's not redrawing these slots, so we should also add that. If we close and reopen this, oh, it's not actually consuming them at all. Or is it? These guys. Oh yeah, I bet it is, but yeah, these slots aren't being redrawn. Okay. So we need to redraw those slots, but it does seem to be working, which is nice. Yeah, when you drag them in, they get the real quantities, and we can consume them from there as well. Cool. So if we were to take a few more of these guys, we get another recipe over here. Missing an item. So if we craft that, we get nothing. Cool. We probably want like some sorting and stuff on this window also, but it's gonna be fine. Cool, so that is working. And we do have the name and type, so that's good. So the only thing left is we need to be redrawing these slots as well. So where we redraw the inventory window, we should probably just redraw all of the source inventories. But they all have different methods to redraw. Storage window manager. I guess it also has redraw inventory, but the alchemy window does not. So that we're going to actually call, let's make a function for redrawing the alchemy slots, since they exist on the inventory window. Okay, so our inventory is alchemy inventory. Our slots, though, let's see, we'll create those in item combining controller. Where actually does this guy live? He's on the inventory window, right? Item combining controller. So we could actually, let's move that over here. What we were about to add to our inventory window manager. Let's say redraw slots in here if we don't already have one. Craft item, start combination, got result, generate item, image, got image, check valid recipe. Okay, cool. So let's say public void redraw slots. Where's slot displays? And then we just take these guys, move it over here, and redraw slot displays. Coolio, and now we can just say over in here, or in our crafting slot manager, we can, that's not right. Oh, this is it. Redraw the alchemy inventory slots. So here we actually want .inventory window .get component item combining controller. Little janky, but it'll do. This is redraw slot displays. It's on the same object, but that's where all of our slots are set up. So we're just going to call it that way. Let's make sure that works. So while we grab a few items, I'm going to go ahead and say global starting data. Is this where we can set the initial items? Player database. Here. So we actually, let's do like 7 random items. And let's make the codex window back to defaulting closed as it should, so we can make sure everything initializes correctly. This should give us a lot more items in our inventory to start with, and we can just combine stuff and test stuff without having to collect stuff every time. So we open this up, we mix an axe and a hammer. Should get a new recipe over here that we can't create. It's a battle axe. Cool, cool, cool. We mix a battle axe and a hammer. Another recipe. A war hammer. Cool. If we were to take a needle and a thread and a whetstone. An enchanted tailor's kit, which we can then craft more, which consumes our ingredients, adds it to the inventory. Cool, cool, cool. Another test we want to do is let's do tongs and a fishing rod, which will give us a recipe here, and we're going to take one of our ingredients over and consume from this ingredient from one inventory, this ingredient from another, and we'll add it to that stack. So that works. Cool, cool, cool. So we're very quickly going to fill up this codex, which is really nice. We can just keep crafting more and more stuff. Well, that's a bug. You shouldn't be able to swap an item back in since you can't accept items, but not a big bug to fix right now. Let's just kind of fill up our codex. Let's make sure that it scrolls properly. We should probably do maybe auto text size on the text things, maybe not. Not sure. But obviously wrapping over the item type is not ideal. Did we finally crash? Yes. This whole error. So this happens because we use integers for the value of an item because I don't want to produce floats or like 1.5 gold. And very rarely the AI produces items that have floats on either the value or the weight. I guess we could do a float on the weight, but it's something we just need to go in and fix. Probably tweak the prompts and also change the types so we can just cast back to the type we need, but allow any type from the AI. So we did crash before we could get the scroll set up, but I think that's fine. What we should do, maybe we... I'm thinking we might want to do these filter buttons for all of the types of items. And we might also want our tooltips here. So maybe we set up the tooltips first. Let's go see how we're doing that on the item slot manager. I think that has the tooltips. Wait, this is in our Anvil window manager. Item slot manager, inventory slot manager, that's what we want. So we have a tooltip parent, which we'll need. We probably want to add that to our UI ref object. Let's do that actually. Let's say points of interest in the UI, public game object, tooltip, or ref tooltip, parent. So we will set that instead of getting it every time. Where in tarnation have we come from? Alright, so this guy on our inventory slot manager, rather than using this, that'll also be nicer because we can rename stuff. So we can get rid of all of this logic. And then I'm sure we have an error down here somewhere, maybe in our collapsed region. Somewhere. Ah, there you are. So here we just have UI references dot instance dot ref tooltip parent instead. Let's set that before I forget. It's going to be this guy. So grab UI references. Tooltip parent is at the very end of the canvas to make sure it draws over everything else. That's why it's a little separate that way. And I guess it should be a transform instead. So let's reset it here. Did it for us. All right. So now we can take these same logic from our pointer enter handler, pointer exit handler, just those actually, because we don't need to handle drag and drop. Let's take these two guys, let's bring them over to our so we've got some options here. Obviously we can add the tooltip logic to our crafting slot, which will handle tooltips here. But these guys are just floating little bits of UI. They don't have a slot attached to them, which is fine. We could call them like a fake slot or something and then add tooltips that way. I think we'll want to add, let's call them like a crafting ingredient slot, because we want to add some click events on them anyway, for like you click on it and it takes you to that item in the crafting window, or like highlights that item in your inventory, or gives you more information about the item somehow. There'll be stuff you do when you click on it basically, so I think they should have some sort of script on them, and that's where we would put this logic anyway. So maybe we add a little script to them now, and we can abstract out some of the logic here that sets like their quantity and name and stuff into that by giving them a load item data or something. And we can also set up the tooltips that way. So we will give this guy a crafting ingredient slot manager, because the other guy's a crafting, what do we call this guy? Crafting slot manager. He should really be like a crafting output slot manager. I think we will rename him just to make it clearer. Crafting output slot manager, renamed the file. Let's make sure these references update in the script too. Cool, no references need reset. I think that's fine. And then we can have on these guys a crafting input slot manager. And they'll basically just be like read-only inventory slots with some extra UI around them and tooltips and maybe some click events on them or something. So here they have a public text mesh pro UGI item name. They also have a public text mesh pro UGI quantity text, and they probably should have the actual data. So we will do a public void load data, or load ingredient data, crafting ingredient and quantity data. So that'll just give us ingredient equals data. Let's take a look at what we're doing over in this area. So instead of all this jazz, So here's our output slot stuff, which, oh, okay, this is actually in the UI, it's not on the slot. So set our UI values, load the output slot data, and then load the input slots data. So here we will have public crafting slot input manager, ingredient 1 and ingredient 2 instead of these guys, and we will say ingredient 1 dot load ingredient data, so we have this hack in right now that all quantities are 1 in recipes, which won't always be the case. So we can either shove that down into here where we set the quantities to 1 and receive in a string for the ingredient name, or we can set the quantities to 1 up here and take in the full crafting ingredient and quantity. I think we want to do it up here. It'll be easier to swap out later. So we will say crafting ingredient and quantity, ingredient 1 is equal to new that. So this will set us up a crafting ingredient and quantity that we can pass in to load the ingredient data. Question mark, question mark, question mark. Load ingredient data. Did I spell it wrong? Is the class wrong? Did I reuse a variable name? Ingredient 1. It is a crafting ingredient. Where do we set that? Crafting input slot manager. Oh, right. Data. Okay, that's fine. And we'll do the same. Slot 1, slot 2. We'll turn that into a loop later, but that should be pretty easy to do. We do want to do all this stuff now in here. So here we can say item name.text. Quantity is not what we want. We want all this jazz. Item or ingredient dot item name, and then here quantity text. Cool. And let's also update the quantity text color based on whether we have all the ingredients. Cool. So that's this guy. Cool. So So that gets rid of all of this. That is a lot more clean. Obviously, loop needs refactored, but a lot cleaner than what we were doing. Let's see here. Let's just double check that that all works. In our this, we need to set item name, quantity text. Let's apply these prefab changes if we can. I may have goofed. Okay, we'll make sure we didn't double up. We did. This is the extra guy. Remove component. That's fine. I have the data we need. Alright, let's make sure all that works and there's just no error, and then we'll go back to setting up the tooltips. But at least these ingredients are handled correctly, hopefully. Actually, we don't need to collect stuff now. Mortar and pestle, let's break down some scissors. Get some iron shavings or something. Enchanted shears. Alright. Well, we definitely broke something. Because our inventory... We don't have a mortar and pestle. It's correctly... we need to redraw these guys after we craft too. Okay, that's fine. So let's take sorted berries. That's not correct. We are redrawing these guys after we craft, huh? Okay, that's also not correct. So if we do... Oh, right, you can't do two of the same, can you? No. If we do fishing rod and assorted berries, we can craft a few of those. It doesn't look like it's pulling in the source quantity correctly. If we move it back to inventory, yeah, it's still 1 out of 1. We can make a bunch of berry bait, but I wonder if it's only doing it on the first ingredient, which is a little weird. Let's go double check our references. Because item name. I did do a little bit of a weird thing where I started outside of the prefab and I added some stuff and didn't apply it correctly. Okay. Strange. Let's try once more. So let's do one where we have more of the first item than the second one. 4 out of 1. That looks correct. Craft, craft. Alright. So now let's do one where we have more of the second item than the first one. Okay, craft. Okay, that's fine. Alright, looks fine. Let's do one where we have the same of both. Craft. That's making sculptor's sickle. We have 5 of them. Alright, that seems fine. Alright, yeah, I think the references were just to the wrong, like they were both updating the second ingredient text, and we were just updating the ingredient 2 data of that text after the ingredient 1 data updated that label. So it was showing what should be here over here and then immediately overriding it with what should actually be there. So these were never updating. They were just always 1-1. But updating those references worked. Cool. Let's get our tooltips working, but I'm going to go to the bathroom first, so I will be right back. Thanks for joining me. Just writing some code. Be right back. Alright, I'm back. Let's get this tooltips working. Alright, so that should be pretty easy to do. All we're going to do is go take a look at our inventory slot manager. We grab our iPointer enter handler, iPointer exit handlers. We'll start on the input slots. We're going to do both the input slots and the output slots separately. But all we got to do really is go take those handlers, the logic we already wrote. Show item tooltip, hide item tooltip, makes sense to me. So we're gonna error on those, but at least it covers the interfaces. Show item tooltip, hide item tooltip. We are duplicating code pretty heavily because we're also gonna throw it in another class, our output slot manager, but we'll come back and clean it up. So we don't need these because we know our recipes are always going to have data. Shown tooltip, we need our prefab item tooltip, which we can set, I suppose. Public game object prefab item tooltip. We'll set that in the inspector in a second. Shown tooltip. Can just do that, I suppose. We're hoisting it up here just so we can have a reference to it on the hide so we can destroy it instead of just keeping it local here. And here, load item data takes an item, so we just pass in ingredient.item. So that should just work. Let's test that before we also apply it to the output slot. But should be good to go. Oh, we didn't set our prefab reference. Un momento. So here, let's actually make our shown tooltip private. Nobody needs to know about that. But let's go find our tooltip prefab somewhere. Item tooltip. Thought I had to sneeze. Alright, ingredient 1 gets item tooltip, and nope, we don't want to do that here. We want to do that in this prefab mode. Item tooltip and item tooltip. Wow. Alright, let's go make sure that those work. These errors I can ignore because I don't write errors. We close that, we craft some stuff. A bucket and shears. Bucket, shears. Nice. And they are the same, perfect for taming wild bushes. Perfect for taming wild bushes. Cool. Have all the data, 110, 1 gold, 1 gold, cool, cool, cool. Alright, let's just double check that it works with crafted items as well. Should, but doesn't hurt to test. Alright. So, let's hook that up on the output item as well. Should be super simple. Output item, crafting output, slot manager. Bring it down here. We're just grabbing these guys. We will grab that. And all of this. So all this could probably be like an interface or something. Something that we can reuse across all these classes that have tooltips to show. But for the time being, it's fine. This guy has item to be crafted instead of ingredient. So that should just work as soon as we, of course, set our tooltip reference on that output slot as well. Item tooltip, wham. Easiest tooltips of my life. Let's go look at them. Bask in their glory. Well, that certainly should have added a recipe. Didn't refresh for some reason. Let's... also, that's a bug, but that's fine for now. Let's go ahead and let's see if this well, let's refresh the window on our own, but let's refresh this, hopefully. Okay, just a weird bug. We craft it. It's good. Alright, it's consuming stuff. And we do have a broken tooltip in some manner. Won't go away. So there's probably a bug somewhere. Let me see if I can reproduce that. I wasn't really paying attention to how that showed up in the first place. But I wonder if it was related to the window not refreshing originally. Or maybe it's on the on click. Alright, so we have a tooltip that goes away. Alchemy hammer. A little weird that the tooltips show up there for a brief moment. Wonder if we need to set the position on mouse hover start or something. I don't know. Okay, so crafting that way, we still... when I click, tooltip never goes away. Okay. So why would that be? Let's look at output slot manager, on pointer enter, on pointer exit. This is not firing when we trigger on pointer down. So what we should do is click down when we do have the ingredients and when we don't have the ingredients. And that'll basically bisect whether if the tooltip stays around forever when we only have the ingredients, the problem is somewhere in this logic. But if we don't have the ingredients and the tooltip still stays around, it's something to do with how Unity's setting up these events. So if we make something here, so we first want to try and craft when we don't have the ingredients. Let's like make one more. We need to redraw the codex window when we craft over here. But if we click here, okay, so the tooltip goes away when we click. But if we craft something and we do have the ingredients, for example this guy, and we click, tooltip stays around forever. So the bug is somewhere in here, and I bet what the bug is when we redraw this codex window, it is destroying the object, our crafting slot output manager, so this object that has the script, and replacing it with a new one. So this hide item tooltip never fires. So we actually want to like on destroy or something. Does Unity have one of those? Maybe that'll work. The easy solution is call like hide item tooltip here before we redo everything, but it would be nice to have some sort of cleanup function. So I want to see if this works before we do that sort of like hack. So to reproduce this bug, all we got to do is craft an item first from the inventory and then again from the codex window. So let's do that real fast. Some scythe and shears. What do we get? Cool, a harvesting blade. We have a tooltip. Here's an example of the other bug that we need to fix. When we click this and craft this way, we have 5 out of 1, 3 out of 1, but it's not redrawing these slots over here. But if we click here, craft it. Alright, so our fix did work. That's fine. Cool. Let's redraw these when we craft from here real fast. So that's going to be over in our item combining controller. All we got to do is at the very end of our long chain, when we're redrawing the inventory, I believe, we also want to redraw the codex window. So we could stick it here. I just want to look around and see if there's somewhere better that might make more sense logically for maintenance reasons. Yeah, so we're consuming the ingredients in this crafting window. Here, and then all we're doing is consuming this, redrawing this, consuming this, redrawing this, and then at the end we set the data here and redraw it. So we never actually redraw the inventory, but we do want to redraw the codex when we consume these guys, and also when we update this, I suppose, because we might produce an ingredient in something else. So let's go ahead and with the output, we redraw the codex window, which will be UI references dot codex window controller. That's not right. Dot codex window dot redraw, and we just want to redraw the last shown recipes. We will copy this because also up here, when we consume the 2 items, we want to make sure we're redrawing the codex window there as well, so we're consuming the ingredients properly. So we have this branch for if we don't have a recipe for those 2 ingredients, and this branch for if we do have a recipe. In both cases, we consume them. So what we will do is, after our check to make sure it's a valid crafting thing, actually, we'll do it after both of these branches because that's the point when we'll have consumed them. So that should work. Let's test that. So let's do a hammer and some tongs. Should get our recipe still when it's built. We got a blacksmith's forge kit. All of our tooltips are working. If we craft another one here, it should update these. Okay, cool, it does. And if we craft it from here, it should also update these. It does. Cool. And that way it adds it to the inventory instead of this output slot. All right, so that all seems working. Things are looking good. Let's go ahead and just fill up our codex. I guess now we can make sure things scroll correctly. Things are, I would say, all working where we wanted them to work for today's stream. We still need to fix up some of the text overlap here, and we can probably do the filters today too. So we're getting some expensive items here. That's 10 gold, dang. Let's just make a bunch more. Fill up this window. I think what I'll end up doing... Oh, did we finally kill it? Yeah. You know, I mean, we could fix that real fast by just making these floats. Let's just do that now, I suppose. And then that'll let us see if those floats ever get exposed in the UI, and we can just cast them back to ints there. Or we could cast them back after serializing and make sure they get stored as rounded numbers, but that might be a good way to just force some errors to see if there's a problem. So let's do floats on these guys. I think we also want to... Alright, what do we need? What do you need, sirs? Create item without AI. Yep, float, float, float. Float, float, float. Is that all three? Cool. What were we doing? Right. We're testing out the codex window. And it all works from scratch now, so that is nice. But I want to go ahead and tweak our recipe database a little bit, I think, to flag all of the recipes as discovered from the get-go, so we can test it with a lot of data in it. So let's actually just quickly add in a little hack here for whenever we add the global recipe, which we do in our global starting data, I believe. Yeah, all these recipes that the game starts with. Let's go ahead and just discover that recipe as well. So we can see them all in the codex, and then that'll give us a lot of data that we can build our filters and stuff really easily with, instead of having to craft a bunch of items every time we hit play. But let's make sure that that works. And surprise, surprise, it does not. Why? Add global data. Interesting. Why don't we have a reference from our global starting data? Add global. Oh, do we not? Are we not calling that anymore? Also, what? Why does my window just disappear? Oh, okay. Let's bring him back. Alright, so does this not get called? Recipe database. On awake, that should trigger that. So we should have global recipes, all recipes.count, and also let's do discovered recipes. So those should both be equal and both be large. Let's just make sure that that is the case. Should be at the very beginning of our console because it's in the awake of our recipe database. So global recipes 389, discovered recipes 0. Huh. Why? So recipe database.instance add global recipe. Oh, it's because I'm using this function instead of this one. Alright, that's fine. We can just move this hack over here. Let's clean it up a little bit. New recipe is equal to that. Cool. So that should now populate our codex properly when we hit play. Just to give us a bunch of data to work with so we can add our filters. This is just a temporary hack anyway, but good to see how it works with a bunch of stuff in it. Be almost 400 rows, I think. So here we broke it, and I bet the reason is some of our recipes point to item names for items that don't exist yet. So we probably do want to handle that. Item type, right. Yeah, so I bet find item is returning null because we don't have an item yet in the game with that name. We do have some recipes for items that don't exist because, I mean, obviously the player is creating items, but if you create an item like a iron bar or something, we want to already have all those recipes in place for what they craft into. So what we want to do, how do we want to handle this? Because in the real game, we won't hit this error because in order for an item to be in your recipe book, it will have been created, obviously. Here we are just kind of willy-nilly adding all the recipes that don't necessarily have items. What we could do is either skip over this row, this recipe row, if it doesn't have an item already created for it. We could add dummy data for if it doesn't have an item. Or we could go in manually to our global starting data, see how many of these recipes point to items that don't exist in the game yet, and create those items. And I think the thing to do is probably just the dummy data real fast. So we'll say item, well, we have 3 different items we're working with, actually. So we have our output item. So maybe we do like that, and if it results in an item that doesn't exist, then the item type will be empty, which I think is fine. So that'll handle the case for the output item because everything else will properly return null, I think. Let's look in load ingredient data, item name. We should probably do that. And here as well. So any items that don't exist yet, the item itself will be null. So we don't have anything to display. We could pass through the string names, but this is more of just a quick hack so we can test filters and stuff. And probably a little nicer for edge cases later so we don't actually error in the game. We just show blank data, which is a little nicer because you can fix that and see it instead of just crashing the whole game during like beta and stuff. And then also in the, this is the input slot, cool. And also in the output slot, we should be good, except for here. Let's see if we get any errors. We probably missed something, but we can at least test it. Okay. The windows are on in the editor right now, but they initialize when we open them. So we did hit an index out of range. Oh, ingredient names. A recipe only has either 0 or 1 ingredient names. Let's... well, obviously we can't do that. Let's say ingredient names dot count. And then let's try and for each string ingredient name, we'll just output that. So at least we'll be able to see what recipe is giving us issues. Then we can go look at the data, fix the data. I wonder... yeah, it's the ingredient names that's out of index or out of range. Okay, we close that, we open that. We look at pressure. Is that because it's air and air? Air and air. Because the ingredients are a set. You know, we actually don't allow players to craft 2 of the same item anyway. So let's just comment that out for now. Let's do a quick pass over, make sure there's... I mean, there actually are going to be a lot of duplicates, I think. I don't really want to go through and comment them all out. So... how do we want to do this? Ingredient names is a list of strings from recipe.ingredient names, which is a hash set. So it really shouldn't be a hash set if I'm allowing multiple ingredients of this, like, duplicative ingredients, air and air. But it's a hash set because I don't want it to be a list, because I don't want it to be ordered. Like, we don't want acid plus rain to be different from rain plus acid. Wonder if C# has like an unordered list. The silly query would be a hash set with duplicates. Kind of defeats the whole point of a hash set, but I would like an unordered list, please. Curious. Alright, that seems more something we will address later. Because we probably do want to be able to double up on items like this. So we will go ahead and just look through, see if there's anything that doubles up, and we'll comment that out for now. Axe and axe, B and B, or, you know what, faster approach is just going to be, in this error, we say if ingredient names.count is greater than 1, we do that. Otherwise, we disable the second ingredient game object. Ingredient 2 dot set active dot game object dot set active false. All right, that seems fine. Actually, what we could do in that case is say ingredient 1 dot load ingredient data. Ingredient 1 data. We'll reload that after we say ingredient 1 data dot quantity is twice as much. So that might be actually nice for what we intend to do, but let's see if that solves our quick error and also sets us up to test filters. I'm gonna leave these closed so I stop having to close and reopen them to initialize them. Let's get a nicer background for just in general. I'm gonna do something like this. All right, let's take a look at this. We're adding all of the recipes in the game to the codex. To start, we get them all, cool. Air has different quantity there. Actually, that's a good error to fix because I bet, yeah, we are just amount needed for recipe equals 1 here. We actually want data dot quantity. Cool. And let's double check on the output as well. See if we have equals 1 somewhere. Load recipe. Yeah, that's correct. Also correct. Well, yeah, that's correct. That's where we're setting it to 1. There was a big old lag spike when we opened it. I want to see that again. And also our tooltips are going to error because we don't have a lot of the item data yet for some of these named items that don't exist in the game, but we have the recipes for them. So we probably want to, yeah, huge spike, which is interesting because we're not like generating anything. It's literally just for building this UI that we had that spike, which is crazy. And we get it every time we open the window. So that's kind of a problem that we need to solve. Obviously the scroll window is not working. Scrolls us back up to the top, but it is kind of nice that, well, so we have a couple things going on here. One, air and air makes pressure, so we see that it takes 2 air, which is nice. But for these other ones that take like acid plus rain, we don't have an item in the game for acid, so they're just showing as empty. So that's a problem. Most of these don't have item types either, so we see like stone has material, sand has material, ash has material, but most of them have none, so also something we should address. But it's kind of nice to see all of these set up. I want to see if I can fix this scroll real fast. So if we go and put a, ooh, do we put a content size fitter on this guy? With a vertical preferred size, is that the move? Does it scroll now? Oh my god, first try. Easy peas. Alright, so now we can go through and look. A little weird that we are moving, but it's fine. We have tons and tons of recipes now, that's cool. So now we can get our filtering working. I think we can ignore a lot of the like bad data that we have because it'll go away when this would actually be shown in the UI, but we can at least set up filtering for, we could do rarity, could do item type, so material, tool, consumable, blah, blah, blah. Could do something else. I think we also want to alphabetize whatever we do show. We probably want to highlight whatever is selected. So we want all, let's just do item types. I think that'll be nice. So let's go ahead and add that content size fitter that we added. And let's start hooking up our filters. So we don't really have icons for these yet, but let's just add some text on top. And this should actually be happening in our prefab view. Because we have our codecs window. There's something weird with, oh, because it's a prefab and a prefab. I think we can just apply everything. YOLO. What could go wrong? But we do want to see our tabs don't match up here to what we actually have, which is concerning. We have 7 tabs here, but in the actual prefab, we also have 7. What? This is a really old window design. What does our codecs window prefab look like? Well, that ain't right. Huh. That is very concerning. Very concerning. Okay. Huh. Okay. I severely do not understand how this could have even possibly happened. But we can't even unpack it. Huh. Alright, well that's fine. Okay. So this is our real prefab. This is pointing to the wrong... What if we apply all these now? Will this be... Okay, that is correct. So if we now go look at our codecs window, which is hidden away somewhere weird. But at least this is correct. Select asset. Where are you at? Okay, it's correct-ish. It's more correct than it was. But that is fine. Let's go do our changes, because we actually have the proper tabs here. Don't know where my Text Mesh Pro went that I just added, but it's fine. Let's make this guy like 28 even. What's a long word? Materials. Let's do like 16, 18. All right, so all. Craftable is a good one, actually. So we'll call that craftable. Let's put tools first. We want materials. And consumables. And I think we'll skip over equipment for now. We haven't added that to the game. And bookmarks are ones that you want to like star it or something, so that'll be a nice feature to add later, but we can skip over it for now. So let's add our consumables. Did we already add materials? We did. This guy and blah blah blah. Consumables. I went slightly too large on the font, so let's do bop 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 bop. 14 even. Yeah, that seems fine. We could even do it like that. But that didn't do what I thought it would do. Oh, right, because it's, yeah, full size. Let's move it back to full expansion. That's fine. On all of these guys, let's move the label to the bottom. And can we do a padding margin bottom? Yeah. 20, 10. 10 looks, 15. That looks good. All right, so on these, we'll add on clicks that basically pull from the recipe database and then redraw the codex window with those recipes. Easy peasy. So let's add a codex filter button. So how do we want to specify in the script, like differentiate between all craftable tools, blah, blah, blah. We could have a string that we map to certain logic. It's probably the easiest way. Let's just do that. It doesn't matter. It's a little janky to have to map string. I guess we can just do an enum or something. Public enum filter type, or recipe filter type, and we will say all craftable tools, materials, consumables. And here, recipe filter type to filter to. Cool. Public void do filter, or redraw codex window with filter. So we will add a button to this that calls that. Op or nor. Unity, no. Yoicks. In order to send the report, you need to specify how often does the problem happen. Period. What happened? IDK. No. Let me back in. So we probably lost a little bit of changes, but I think I saved pretty recently. I usually have a pretty bad habit of constantly control-S-ing. Let's see what we got. We got our labels. Probably just missing our button. So UI, codecs window, tabs controller, this guy. I guess our code can't really crash, so yeah, we just add a button here. And on the button, I guess we could add an image to it for like the highlight. Let's just do none for now. We can handle the highlight manually by just changing the color or something later. But we can drag that in, call it codecs filter button, redraw codecs window with filter. Cool. And then we can set the type to filter to there. So then we can add codecs filter button to all these guys, add button to all these guys. Call the same function on all of them. Probably could call a like single function on the codecs window, but I think this is a slightly nicer way than having to curry around the filter for the specific button that was clicked. So we'll just set these up real fast. Because this way it's calling within the context of this object, so we know exactly what the type filter is, so we don't need to go like fetch it from the codecs window by like either grabbing it from the event caller or like checking where the mouse cursor is or something weird like that. All these guys, no transition. So let's set up our craftable, set up tools, materials, and consumables. And all we're gonna do now is say list of recipe. Recipes is equal to recipe database instance to all recipes, and then we will filter. So what is this? This is a hash set, so let's do a .toList recipe. And then we can say switch type to filter to case all. Perfect, that's all we got. We will repeat that for all of the filter types, and then we will go ahead and just redraw the recipe list like that. And that'll set our last shown recipes, so everything will be based on whatever we selected. So let's go ahead and do these filters. So craftable is the next one. We don't have an isCraftable function. What we could do, we do have that logic in our crafting output slot manager. It's this guy. So maybe we could we don't have the quantities of the ingredients in the recipe object, which seems like an oversight. But it does make sense for this to live on the recipe class, I think. So what we're going to do instead is say string ingredient name in ingredient names. We will say ingredient name and we'll say int quantity needed for recipe is equal to 1 placeholder until we add quantities to ingredients in recipes. So that'll work for that. We can probably now take a look at this and say does this have a recipe stored? It does not. Okay, that's fine. We can collapse that later. But we do now have the ability to say, is this recipe craftable? So let's say recipe dot has ingredients. Let's rename that to player has all ingredients. So that'll filter our recipes to just those. Case recipe filter type dot tools is the next one. Resulting item. It's actually resulting item name. So we do item database dot instance dot find item. Maybe all these lookups are why the UI takes a long time to load when we build that UI. Item type. We want to make sure that that is nullable. And then we'll do the same for materials. And the same for consumables. And we could have it a default, but I think it's fine for now. It is an enum, so there's only so many options it can have. Cool, so that filters down our recipes list. We redraw the window with that list. We also need to do highlight the selected filter button. Cool, let's see if that works. And if it does, I would love to go get a snack soon. So we might wrap up if this works. If it doesn't work, we'll fix it up. Then we'll go get the snack. All right, so we have all of our recipes. Craftable. That looks promising. All. Does take a really long time still to show them all, but you know, that does work. We still need to sort them by output name, I'd say. Tools should give us just tools. That seems like we're missing some tools. But maybe let's scroll through here and see if we can find some tools. Because we might just not have very many tools to begin with. Yeah, it's looking like we might just not have tools in the data, which we still need to add in, but I've been putting off all that until we switch our items over to scriptable objects. So this is fine. Let's try materials. All materials looks good. Scroll sensitivity is so low, we'll change that too. And consumables, which there are none, but that I guess works. Alright, so the filters work. That is awesome. We need to show which filter is active, probably update some data about like how many recipes there are. But the craftable filter is awesome. You can go click that, craft it. Hope it works if inventory is closed. oh, it's only consuming 1 even on recipes that take 2. All that will be fixed when we sort out and add ingredient quantities to recipes. But for now, it's looking good. You can craft stuff. As you craft stuff, you unlock that recipe in the codex. And cool. That is a tool. This is the craftable section. So tools should now have precision fishing rod. It does. If we were to maybe make that even better, hopefully it'll be a tool and add it here. So that still needs to, oh. Well, there is a small bug there. I'm going to explain what it is, and then I'll fix it off camera. But what's happening is we, in our Codex window manager, all of our logic for redrawing is based on these last shown recipes, which are these exact recipes. When we add a new recipe that happens to match our filter, it's still not in the last shown recipes. We really need to store the last used filter and filter the recipes to that. Because if we now click tools, we have a new one. And these are now the last shown recipes. But when we redraw this with last shown recipes, it doesn't include the new one because obviously it's not one of the previously shown recipes. You gotta refresh that. So that is looking good. I like the codex is looking good. Still a few bugs here and there. Lots of polish to do for sure. Lots of UI tweaks and making things better and cleaning up the code and all that. But, you know, it's working. So I'd been putting off building the codex in a while because I wasn't sure exactly how I wanted it to feel. But it's looking good. I think we are ready to move on to new stuff in the next week. So with that, I'll say thank you all for watching. Thanks for joining me. I don't think I'll raid anybody this week, but always happy to stream. Thanks for coming in. My name's Andrew. I'm one of the co-founders at Chroma Golem, and this is Elixir Emporium. If you want to follow along with our development, we also have a Discord. I've just dropped it in the chat, or you can check out the link in our description. This video and all previous videos are also up on our YouTube, which I think is also a command. Cool, that works too. So you can also check that out. It's also linked in the Twitch, so if you're watching this on YouTube, you know where it is already. And I will see you guys next week. Thanks for tuning in.